Hi everyone, welcome back. This is going to be part 5 of the History of the American Labor Movement video series, but we're going to kind of go back a little bit in time today. The past 4 videos have been moving forward in a pretty linear manner, but I wanted to go back and talk about the first general strike in America that got us the 10-hour workday. So in the last video, I kind of glazed over it. I said it was like the one bright spot in a dark period for labor organizing. And that's true, but it was more than just a bright spot. It was a big deal, and it took a lot of effort and, organizing, and it took a long time to build momentum to the point where people were willing to attempt to pull off a general strike. And so I wanted to go back and talk about it. And also, I think it's important to talk about at this point in time specifically because people are talking about how we need to have a general strike in America today, and how that is going to be the only way that we are going to, recenter the needs of the working class. And I don't disagree, but I think that people need to really pay attention to how much effort and organizing and time and building momentum goes into these sort of things. Now, granted, 1830s America is much smaller scale as far as size, population, government, smaller economy, but it's still applicable, I think. Okay? So we're going to go back to 1822, and we're in Philadelphia. Now, at this time in history, people who work for an employer, which is the majority of people, are working from sunrise to sunset. And you can imagine in the summer, that's a really long day, right? The sun comes up at like 5 a.m., it doesn't set until like 8 or 9, and you're expected to work the entire time. You don't have any guaranteed breaks for lunch or dinner. You don't have any guaranteed days off. Weekends and after work hours aren't a thing. Those are all things that were won by organized labor over, throughout our history. So the people in Philadelphia wanted and were asking for from, their bosses, a 6 to 6 workday, right? 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And they wanted to have 2 1-hour guaranteed breaks, basically so they could eat, lunch and dinner. And so they asked, and they, presented their case to the city and things like that. And they were, declined. They turned it down because why would the bosses grant any concessions to these workers? And so 600 carpenters came together in basically a carpenters guild, and they called a strike. They said, we're going to strike until we have our 10-hour workday. Now, the strike failed, right? Because they didn't have support from anybody else in the city. They didn't have, any citywide, they didn't have enough organizing. They didn't have a plan. It was a failed strike, and two things came out of it. One, the carpenters had a lot of lost wages. That was the bad side. The upside was that it planted a seed, right? So this strike failed, but maybe there's something we can do as the working class. So in the next year, we have 15 societies formed. So 15 basically labor societies, and they come together into our first American Labor Federation. And it's called the Philadelphia Mechanics Union of Trade Associations. So this is a big, historical point. However, unfortunately, instead of taking the strike route, which would probably have been pretty effective given, how many people were in the Federation at this time, they decided that it would be more effective to go through electoral politics. And so they turned their labor federation into a political party, and they developed a working man's platform. They called themselves the Workies. That was their cute nickname, the Workies. And this was their platform. They wanted a 10-hour workday, but they said, if we're going to do this and we're going to, have this platform, we need to ask for more. So they said, we're also going to ask for universal male suffrage. We're also going to ask for basically universal public education for the kids, because at this point in time, the only people who had guaranteed access to education were people who could pay for it, right? And then they also said, we want the abolishment of debtor's prison, because there were 75,000 people in prison for debt, and half of them had debts that were less than $20. So this was where we really started criminalizing poverty in America, and the Workies wanted to put an end to that. So the first year they ran 8 nominees for City Council of Philadelphia, and they didn't have any wins, but they garnered a large enough percentage of the votes that they were encouraged. So the next year they kind of, kept the ball rolling and spread, the word of what they were trying to do, and they ran 21 people, and 20 of them won positions on the city council. And so all of the working people were like really excited because, oh wow, we can really do this. We can affect change through the government by electing leaders who represent us. And someone else noticed that, and that would be the people who were in power and the people who had money and the people who had a vested interest in keeping the working class in its place, basically. And so they began basically a smear campaign of the workies. They said, and they printed it in leaflets, they did flyers, they put it in like the official newspaper. It was like by word of mouth through polite society that the workies were atheists, they were anti-Christian, they were infidels, what a word, and they were advocating for free love in the city of Philadelphia, which you can imagine in the 1830s, the idea of free love is not really something that's smiled upon. And essentially, through this smear campaign, people started being blacklisted in the city. They were being whispered about. People believed the very worst of them because if you read something in a newspaper at this point in time, even today sometimes, if you read something in a newspaper, people take it as fact. And this basically completely dissolved the party. Nobody ran for any positions the next year on the working man's platform, or really ever again. So we're going to fast forward to the spring of 1829 in New York. And at this point in time, we're kind of in an economic downturn in America. And so the employers, the factory owners for the most part, said, not only are we not going to give you a 10-hour workday, but we might need you to work longer than sunrise to sunset. So they were asking them to come in before the sun came up and stay, past the sunset. They had no guaranteed breaks to eat. And the reason they were asking this is because they wanted to maintain the same profit margins as they had before the economic downturn at the price of like the mental and physical health of their employees, basically. And so this was the breaking point, right? So every society, every group of people have a breaking point where it's just one step too far. So all of a sudden, the city's working men are having massive meetings, just like hundreds and hundreds of working people are all coming together and saying, we can't do this. Like, we literally cannot do this. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose our jobs. So what are we going to do? So they all came together, all the different trades, all the different, walks of life, and they assembled a committee of 50 people, and they called it the Committee of 50, and they said, okay, so whatever this Committee of 50 can negotiate with the employers and the owners, that's what we'll do, and hopefully we can, get out of this, like, longer hours. And so the working people at this point didn't realize the power that they had, but the bosses did, because when they saw that these people were coming to negotiate, like, with solidarity behind them, they immediately backpedaled. They were like, oh, no, we're just kidding. Like, let's go back to the sunrise sunset thing. Like, don't upset the status quo, right? But it was too late, because now the Committee of 50 was like, I think we have them running scared. What else can we do? So they unfortunately decide to also take the route of political action. And they once again start running people on the working man's platform. Now, this is in New York now, and we saw what happened in Philadelphia, and the people in power also saw what happened in Philadelphia. So they basically ran the same playbook, the same smear campaigns and bribery and things like that, propaganda, blacklisting, and there was only one person elected in New York from the Working Man's Party before it dissolved. And, this kind of happened in all the various cities because people thought they were going to, have change through electoral politics. They thought they were going to be able to really do it. And they would have been able to if they hadn't been being countered by the wealthy, right? And so this keeps happening until 1835 to 1836. At this point in time, people in labor organizing are saying, okay, politics isn't the sphere for us. If we're not getting anywhere, we're still working from sun up to sundown. We're exhausted. It's been years that we've been asking for a 10-hour workday. And so all at once, all of the trades that had been organized, pre-war, they kind of resuscitated themselves. And new trades and, factory workers that had never been organized before, they start organizing themselves. And they say, okay, this time we're going to organize federations, citywide federations, but we're not going to go the politics route. We're not going to try to get incremental change. We're not going to try to get votes. We're not going to try to, sway things through the proper channels. We are going to build our power, and we are going to counter the man, basically. So we have citywide federations of labor in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and several others. And then they kind of came together nationwide. So they had interconnectivity between the cities. And they said, well, what else do we need before we move forward with this? And they said, well, the number one tool that's being used against us is the press. So let's make our own press. So now we have citywide federations. We have them, solidarity throughout the nation. We have them running their own press so they can combat propaganda. And they start doing little test strikes, small scale test strikes in, cities, nothing like citywide yet, right? Just little things just to see what would happen, just to see what they could get. And these little strikes for like better working conditions and things like that, they were successful. So they said, okay, all systems go. And in Philadelphia, the first city, they came together, their labor federation with, professionals, merchants, tradesmen, factory workers, mill workers, everybody. And they said, general strike, shut the city down. And they paralyzed the city. Nothing moved in Philadelphia until pretty quickly the people in charge said, okay, 10-hour workday, like, please don't ask for anything else, 10-hour workday. And then the victory was so overwhelming. And remember, they have a free press. They're talking to each other in other cities that, like, rapidly, Salem, Hartford, Schenectady, New York, Newark, and Baltimore, they all did a general strike all at once. They shut it down, and it was like a day later that it was like, okay, everybody gets a 10-hour workday. Even cities that didn't have like the organization yet and they didn't have their federations, they all got the 10-hour workday because the people in those cities did not want their workers organizing like the people in the other cities were. So basically, they had employers running scared. They had solidarity, they had their press, and they had demonstrated that they could completely paralyze the city and affect the bottom dollar of the wealthy people. And so this is a win. This is a big win. And unfortunately, we roll right up into the Civil War after this. So once again, the war derails the labor movement. And that brings us back to where we left off in the other video, where we're kind of in like a powder keg of post-Civil War, economic depression. And we'll pick up there next week. So relish in the fact that there was a win. Relish in the fact that in America, in the past, we have had a general strike that shut down gigantic, major cities for the time. And where working people got exactly what they wanted and had, the ruling class running scared. So relish in that a little bit, right? Take a win once in a while. I'll see you next time.